There are 11 men in a room above a Jerusalem street, and the city outside wants them dead. It is not a large room. The ceiling is low. The air smells of lamp oil and fear. 11 men, fishermen, a tax collector, a zealot, a few whose occupations history never bothered to record, are pressed together in a city that just executed their teacher 36 hours ago. The door is bolted. The windows face the alley. The 12th seat at the table is empty, and they know where Judas is. They know what Judas did. They know the field outside the city where his body ended up, a potter's field, a place for foreigners and the unnamed dead, bought with 30 pieces of silver that burned so badly he couldn't keep them. That seat will stay empty for a while. This is not a story about heroes. This is not a story about fearless warriors who charged into battle with swords drawn and hymns on their lips. This is not a story about men who had everything figured out. This is a story about 11 terrified human beings who saw something so impossible, so world-rewriting, that they could not unknow it, and what that knowledge cost them for the rest of their lives. Before we are done, you will know what happened to each of them. You will know which one was the first to die and who ordered it, and why it took less than 10 minutes. You will know which one ended up further from Jerusalem than any of them ever imagined. On a subcontinent most of them had never heard of, founding a church that still exists today. We will get to him, but not yet. What you need to understand first is what these men were before Jesus found them, not what Sunday school told you, not the stained glass version with halos and calm expressions, the actual men. Peter was impulsive enough to cut off a soldier's ear in a garden and then deny he knew Jesus 3 times before sunrise. On the same night. Andrew was his quieter brother, standing always slightly behind, the one who brought people to Jesus rather than speaking himself. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were nicknamed by Jesus himself Boanerges, sons of thunder, which tells you something. Matthew had spent his career taking money from his own people on behalf of Rome, which made him the most hated kind of man in first-century Judea. Simon the Zealot had likely spent years dreaming of violent revolution before he met the man who told him to put the sword away. These were not polished men. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the 4th century and drawing on sources far older than himself, described the disciples as men whom the world considered unworthy. Uneducated in the academic sense, unconnected in the political sense, unknown in every sense that the ancient world used to measure a person's value. And yet, after the resurrection, after 40 days of appearances, after a morning on a Galilean beach where Jesus cooked fish over a charcoal fire and reinstated the man who had denied him, after all of that, Jesus gave them a single instruction: go. The Greek word is apostolos, sent one. It is not a title of honor, it is a job description. You have been dispatched. You are going somewhere you may not come back from. That is what the word means, and they went. And here is what happened to them. The first of them to die was James. Not James the Less, not James the brother of Jesus, James the son of Zebedee, the thunder brother, the one who once asked Jesus if he should call fire down from heaven on a Samaritan village that refused to welcome them. That James. The year was approximately AD 44. Herod Agrippa I, grandson of Herod the Great, the same family line that murdered infants in Bethlehem a generation earlier, was consolidating power in Jerusalem and looking for ways to win favor with the religious establishment that had always been suspicious of his family's half-Jewish bloodline. Killing a leader of the Jesus movement was a clean political calculation. It would cost him nothing and gain him goodwill, so he arrested James. The trial, if there was one, left no record. What the Book of Acts records takes exactly 1 sentence. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. That is all. No speech, no miracle, no angel opening the prison doors the night before. Just a sword and a man who had walked on water with Jesus, or tried to, and a morning that ended before noon. Here's what most people miss about that sentence. Josephus, writing in his Antiquities of the Jews, confirms the broader picture. Herod Agrippa's campaign against the Jerusalem church was calculated and swift. He arrested Peter next, intending the same outcome. An angel freed Peter. James had already been buried. Why did God free one and not the other? That is a question the text does not answer, and there is something important in that silence. James died first. Peter lived decades longer, only to face a different execution in a different city under a different emperor. The outcome was the same. The timing was different, and neither man apparently spent his remaining days demanding an explanation. Stay with me, because the story of Peter's death is not what you think it is. It does not happen in Jerusalem. It does not happen at the hands of a Jewish king trying to win votes. It happens in Rome, under Nero, during the first systematic state-sponsored persecution of Christians in the empire's history. Tacitus records it in his Annals, written around AD 116, describing how Nero, after the Great Fire of Rome in AD 64, needed someone to blame, and the Christians were convenient. They were already unpopular, already rumored to practice cannibalism and incest, rumors that spread the way rumors always spread, from fear and misunderstanding. Peter was in Rome. We do not know exactly how long he had been there. We know he was there because Clement of Rome, writing before the end of the 1st century, places him there. We know he was executed there because Origen, one of the early church's most careful scholars, cited by Eusebius, records the manner of his death in specific terms. Peter was crucified. But here is the detail that has stayed in the memory of the church for 2,000 years. Peter asked to be crucified upside down. Not because he was making a theological statement, though theologians have found meaning in it ever since. He asked because he said he was not worthy to die in the same position as his Lord. You have to sit with that for a moment. This is the man who cut off a soldier's ear and then lied about knowing Jesus before a servant girl at a charcoal fire. This is the man Jesus called a scandalon, a stumbling block, in the same breath that he called him the rock the church would be built on. This is the man who sank in the water because he took his eyes off the one who told him to walk. That man at the end asked to die upside down, not out of performance, not for the crowd. He was already condemned. The decision was made. There was nothing left to prove. It was the last private request of a man who had spent 30 years thinking about a charcoal fire in a Jerusalem courtyard and what he said beside it. And now Andrew, Peter's brother, the quieter one, the one who is always in the background of the gospel stories, the one who told Jesus about the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish, the one who brought Peter to Jesus in the first place. Andrew does not preach the sermon at Pentecost. Andrew does not write letters that become scripture. Andrew is the one who, in every story he appears in, is pointing away from himself towards someone else. He was crucified in Patras, in what is now Greece, around AD 60. But the manner of it. The governor of Achaia, a man named Hegesippus, according to the Acts of Andrew, a 3rd century text drawing on earlier tradition, had Andrew arrested for converting his wife and brother to Christianity. The cross they prepared for him was X-shaped, not the traditional upright cross, an X. Some historians believe this was meant as a humiliation, a different, lesser death. If so, they misread the man entirely. Andrew preached from that cross for 2 days. 2 days, with his arms and legs bound to the wood, elevated so the crowd could see him. Andrew talked about what he had seen, about what he had heard, about a morning on a Galilean beach when a man he had never met told him and his brother to follow. And they left their nets without finishing the thought. The crowd grew. The governor, alarmed, ordered him taken down. Andrew reportedly refused. He said he could see the glory of the cross now and he would not leave it. He died on the second day. We are halfway through the 12 and already you can feel the pattern. These men did not die because they were reckless. They did not die because they were naive or because they misunderstood the risks. They died because they had seen something, and the seeing of it made silence impossible. If this kind of history is what you come to this channel for, the parts of the Bible story that most Sunday sermons don't have time to reach, then hit subscribe before we continue. There is more of this coming, and the stories we have not told yet are, if anything, stranger than the ones we have. Let's keep going. Matthew. You know him as the tax collector, the one sitting at his booth on the road outside Capernaum when Jesus walked past and said 2 words, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and left a career that had taken years to build and never looked back. You know him as the author of the first gospel. What you probably do not know is what happened to him after he finished writing it. The honest answer is history is not entirely sure. Eusebius records that Matthew preached first to the Hebrews before departing to foreign nations. Clement of Alexandria, writing in the late 2nd century, notes that Matthew lived on a diet of seeds and vegetables, a detail so specific it has the ring of genuine memory rather than invention. Beyond that, the traditions diverge. Some place him in Ethiopia, others in Persia. The Coptic Church in Egypt venerates him as a martyr. The Roman martyrology records him as dying by sword. What all the traditions agree on is this: he left. The man who sat at a tax booth, one of the most sedentary, bureaucratic, rooted in one place occupations the ancient world had, became one of the most widely traveled figures of the 1st century. The sent one went where he was sent, even when nobody remembers exactly where that was. Now pay attention to this. Bartholomew, he is one of the most obscure figures among the 12. He appears in every list of the apostles in the Gospels and Acts and almost nowhere else. Some scholars believe he is the same person as Nathanael, the one Philip brought to Jesus, the one Jesus described as a man in whom there is no deceit, the one who looked at Jesus and said, "How do you know me?" and received an answer so precise he fell to his knees on the spot. If that identification is correct, then Bartholomew Nathanael went from a moment of pure, stunned wonder under a fig tree in Galilee to a death in Armenia that is, without question, the most brutal in the entire tradition. He was skinned alive. The Armenian Apostolic Church, one of the oldest Christian communities on earth, founded in the late 3rd century but drawing on a tradition it traces directly to Bartholomew, preserves the account. He was arrested by a regional king named Astyages, whose brother had converted to Christianity under Bartholomew's preaching. The sentence was designed to be as public and as terrible as possible. Bartholomew did not recant. The man in whom there was no deceit in the end gave them nothing to work with. He had seen what he had seen. He would not say otherwise. And then James the Less, James the son of Alphaeus, called the less probably because he was shorter than James the son of Zebedee, or younger, or both. A man so consistently in the background of the gospel narrative that it is easy to forget he is there at all. But Hegesippus, a 2nd century Jewish Christian historian whose work survives only in fragments quoted by Eusebius, gives us something remarkable. An account of James that reads less like legend and more like reportage. Hegesippus records that James was so devoted to prayer that the skin of his knees had become calloused and hardened, like the knees of a camel. He was known in Jerusalem not as a dangerous revolutionary, but as a holy man, respected even by those who did not follow Jesus, consulted by people who wanted an honest answer. The religious authorities, Hegesippus says, thought they could use him. They brought him to the pinnacle of the temple, the same high parapet from which Satan had tempted Jesus to jump, and asked him publicly to denounce Jesus. James looked out over the city. Then he said, "Why do you ask me about the Son of Man? He is seated at the right hand of great power, and he will come on the clouds of heaven. The crowd below, hearing him, broke into worship. The authorities threw him from the parapet. He fell to the courtyard below, and because he was still alive, they beat him with the long wooden club used by cloth workers to pound and full fabric. A fuller's club, the most ordinary domestic unmilitary weapon imaginable. He died in the courtyard of the temple he had prayed in every morning for decades, the knees of a camel. And the last word out of his mouth, according to Hegesippus, was a prayer. Lord, forgive them. They do not know what they are doing. He was not the first person to pray that prayer from a position of fatal violence. He was not the last. Now we get to the one who went furthest. Remember the detail from the beginning. The man who would end up on a subcontinent most of his companions had never heard of, founding a church that still breathes and prays and baptizes people today. That man is Thomas. Thomas, Didymus in Greek, Thoma in Aramaic. Both words mean the same thing, twin. His actual name may never have been recorded. Everyone called him by his nickname. We do not know whose twin he was. We do not know if that person ever came to faith. We know almost nothing about Thomas that is not, in some way, about doubt. He is the one who said when Jesus announced they were going back to Judea where people had just tried to stone him, "Let us also go that we may die with him." That is either great courage or very dark humor, and the text does not tell you which. He is the one who, when Jesus said, "You know the way to where I am going," said plainly, "Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way?" An honest answer in a room full of men who were probably nodding along, and he is the one, the famous one, the one who gave his name to a particular kind of faith struggle, who was not in the room when Jesus appeared to the other 10 on the night of the resurrection, who came back to find them transformed and said he would not believe unless he could put his fingers in the nail holes, unless the evidence was physical, verifiable, real. A week later, Jesus appeared again, specifically for Thomas, specifically for the doubt. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas looked at him and said 8 words that are, if you think about them, the most compressed theological statement in all 4 Gospels. "My Lord and my God." Not my teacher, not my rabbi, not even my risen friend. Lord God. 2 titles the Jewish tradition reserved for one being alone, spoken by a Jewish man in a room in Jerusalem 7 days after the crucifixion. And then Thomas was sent. Here's the part nobody tells you. The Acts of Thomas, a Syriac text from the 3rd century drawing on traditions scholars trace to sources at least a century earlier. Records that Thomas was assigned to India by lot among the apostles. He did not want to go. According to the text, he said he was too weak for the journey, that he needed to stay closer to home. Jesus appeared to him in a dream and told him to go. He went. The Thoma Church in Kerala on the southwestern coast of India traces its founding directly to Thomas's arrival around AD 52. This is not a legend invented in the Middle Ages. The community is documented by travelers and scholars across centuries. The Portuguese arriving in India in the 1500s expecting to find pagans found instead an ancient Christian community that had never heard of Rome, that had its own liturgy, its own bishops, its own unbroken memory of a man who came from the West with wounds still fresh in his hands. Think about what that means. This is a man who before the resurrection could not make himself believe without physical evidence, whose first recorded instinct when something was beyond him was to say so out loud, plainly, in front of everyone. And that man traveled further from Jerusalem than any of the 12. Further than Peter went to Rome, further than Andrew went to Greece, further than Bartholomew went to Armenia, across the Arabian Sea into a civilization that had its own ancient traditions, its own complex theological vocabulary, its own understanding of the divine. He arrived, he preached, people believed. He was martyred in what is now Chennai, in the southeastern corner of India, around AD 72. Speared on a hill outside the city now called San Thoma. The cathedral built over the site of his tomb is still standing. Here is what I want you to feel before we close. Imagine you are asked to testify in a courtroom, not about something you read, not about something you were told, about something you saw with your own eyes, something that contradicts everything the court has decided is true. And you know before you walk through that door, that testifying truthfully will cost you your job, your reputation, your safety, possibly your life. Most people in that moment discover a flexibility in their memory they did not know they had. Most people find a way to soften it, qualify it, walk it back just enough to survive. These 12 men had that choice. Every single day for the rest of their lives they had that choice. They did not take it. Not one of them. Not under sword, not under cross, not under a fuller's club in a temple courtyard, not on an X-shaped cross in Greece, not on a hill above the Bay of Bengal in southern India. That is not fanaticism. Fanatics die for what they have been told. These men died for what they had seen. There is a difference, and it is the most important difference in the history of the world. So here is what we know. James was the first beheaded in Jerusalem before most of the world had heard the name Jesus. Peter died upside down in Rome because he did not consider himself worthy of any other position. Andrew preached from his cross for 2 days and would not come down. Matthew left his tax booth and walked into a history that cannot quite agree on where he ended up, only that he went. Bartholomew died in Armenia without recanting. James the Less prayed for his killers from the courtyard floor. Thomas crossed an ocean and built a church that outlasted every empire that tried to erase it. And John, the last one, the one who outlived all the others, in Antiquities, died in Ephesus, old, surrounded by people who loved him, having written letters to churches across the known world. Tradition records that in his final years, too frail to walk, he would be carried into the congregation and say the same thing every time, the same sentence, over and over until some of them grew impatient with it. Little children, love one another. That was all. Love one another. The man who had stood at the foot of the cross and watched the whole thing. The man who had run to the empty tomb and believed before he fully understood, distilled everything down to that. Takeaway 1. The historical record is more specific than most people realize. These men are not mythology. Josephus, Tacitus, Eusebius, Hegesippus, sources with no interest in flattering the Christian movement, confirm the outline of what happened to them. You can push back on individual details. You cannot push back on the pattern. Takeaway 2. Their deaths do not prove that Jesus was who he said he was. What they prove is that these men believed he was, not casually, not sentimentally, not as a comfort in hard times, but with the full weight of their bodies and their years. Whatever they saw after the resurrection, it produced a conviction that did not bend. Takeaway 3. Most of us will never be asked to die for what we believe, but we are asked constantly to be inconvenienced for it. To say something true in a room that does not want to hear it, to stay when it would be easier to leave, to love someone who has given us every reason not to. The 12 were not superhuman. They were impulsive, doubting, argumentative, sometimes cowardly men who met someone they could not forget. That is the only explanation the record gives us. And it turns out, that is enough. Which of these 12 stories hit you the hardest? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If you want more of this, the history the church often leaves on the cutting room floor, the archaeology and the ancient sources that fill in the gaps. Subscribe. There is so much more to find. And if you are somewhere in the middle of your own doubt right now, If you are the Thomas in the room, the one who was not there when everyone else seemed to get it, the one who needs something real and not just something told, then hear this. Jesus came back, specifically for him, specifically for the doubt, and he has a habit of doing that.